We did a 3-inch lift on the Jeep. So now we're going to go through and put adjustable upper and lower control arms on the front, and we're going to walk through the process on how to set those up. I did another video on the adjustable control arms for the back and how to set those up. I'll throw that little card right up here for that video. I'll also link it down in the description. Now I'm not going to walk through the process of installing the control arms because there's 1,000 videos on that. It's actually going to be the setup. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and get these control arms put on here, and then we'll go from there. Before I put the first lower arm on, I need to set my length. So I like to start by setting it to the length of the factory arm. So I'll put my bolt in there. My bolt there, so I know that it's the same length as the factory arm to start with. And since I have lifted the Jeep, I'm going to add a 1/4 inch to the length of this and then go install it. I will do the exact same thing on the lower for the other side. Same thing like we did on the lowers. Line it up, drop our bolts in, get our factory length, add a 1/4 inch, same thing on both sides, give us a starting point. Okay, we've got our control arms in, uppers and lowers. Once again, I just matched them up to the factory length, made them a 1/4 inch longer, so that should push the axle forward. Also keep that pinion angle similar, because now we need to go through and set all that stuff up. So now what we need to do is we get this thing up in the air. I need to get the springs out of it so we can get our bump stops centered to the axle. So that's what we're doing now. Okay, so we get the wheels off, springs out. I actually had to take the track bar off on this side to get enough droop to get the springs out. But then I've got this pushed all the way up to where I'm hitting the bump stops. And we want this to be centered. So it actually looks like this side, the axle could come back just a little bit. If we look at this side, we're pretty much centered. So that tells me that side of the axle over there is a little more forward than this side. Now, I don't really care left to right, because that's what this track bar is for. That's to center the axle. We are just looking at forward and back. So I made this a little bit shorter, pulled that axle back just a little bit. I did about 1 turn, and we're pretty good now. I think I'm gonna leave it there. Now I do want to come back and do the same thing to the upper. I want to make it the same 1 turn in so that axle stays square. Okay, everything is back together. Track bar is back on, tighten back up. I got the axle recentered with that adjustable track bar. Now we need to get into setting up specifically the caster pinion angles. Now, I'm taking this a step further because I'm gonna put ball joints in this. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the ball joints out. That will give me a nice spot right here to check my caster angle while we get those control arms set up. Got the ball joints out. I have got the Jeep setting on its own weight with jack stands under the axle. So this would be ride height. And it's looking like about 7 degrees of caster, which is factory. You know, I had those arms adjusted out, kind of a guess to start with. That gives me a factory caster reading, which might be too much. So what I'm actually going to do is go through, put this side all back together, get the Jeep back setting on its own tires, and then I'm actually going to try to adjust that a little bit, because what will happen is if I have too much caster, I'll get a driveline vibration because the pinion angle is off. So I might try to take a degree, maybe 1.5 degrees, get to about 5.5 degrees of caster. And then when I do the other side, I'll be able to recheck it. We got everything put back together, and I've been doing a little checking on the pinion angle, and I'm thinking the caster we're reading is probably not correct, because my pinion angle actually looks pretty good too. I've got about 7.5 to 8 on my pinion angle, and then we'll go up and check the drive shaft. If we look at our drive shaft angle, we're like 8, 8.5. So I mean, we are 1 degree off from our drive shaft to our pinion angle. If you're within, 2, maybe 3, should be good. So I'm gonna contribute this to the transfer case drop that we did. So I can go ahead and get these control arms all tightened up. Now I will take this thing in and get it aligned to just find out what the true caster is, to see if we want to adjust that at all. We got the Jeep all put back together, and surprisingly I got pretty lucky when I put it together and got those bump stops centered. And just my guesstimate, when I put these control arms in, I was pretty much right on. Now there may be some adjustments after I go to the alignment shop, but let's talk about if I needed to make some changes. Okay, so if we needed to change the pinion or the caster, which if you change one, it does change the other, they are related. So we get a jack, get it right under the front end, just put a little bit of pressure, so that takes the resistance off the upper control arms. Then you would take your bolt out on one side of each of the top control arms, or you could just take them out. Then you're going to either lower this part of your front end or raise it, depending on what you're going to do. Now, if you lower this, you're going to increase the caster. If you raise this, you're going to decrease the caster. Now, with a double cardan drive shaft like this needs to be basically just pointing straight at the transfer case. This is the most important part of this setup. The pinion angle takes precedent over the caster, but you want to get as much caster as you can for drivability. That is what's going to make your steering wheel return to center. It also has a lot to do with your steering wheel resistance. Just makes them drive a whole lot better. So once I get this thing on the alignment rack, I may come back and need to do some fine tuning. So if we needed this to come down, what we're going to have to do is shorten the upper control arms. What that's going to do is allow that thing to tip further back. If we needed to raise this to change caster or pinion angle, once again, you're just going to have to extend those upper control arms. Now, the way to do that is take the control arms out. Once again, get your pinion angle set where you want it. Then you're going to adjust one control arm to where the bolts go in easily. You don't want any resistance, you don't want any binding in it. Then you're just going to do the exact same thing for the other side. Make the bolt slide in easy. The control arms will most likely not be the same length. Now if they happen to be the same length, that's also fine, but what you need to do is make sure that when you get everything set, that the bolts slide in and out of those upper control arms easily. So, took this thing, put it on the alignment rack, figured out that my caster was actually about 4. So I went ahead and increased that to 5, which basically means that top ball joint is 5 degrees behind the lower ball joint. Now, I didn't find a good way with my angle finder to get an accurate reading on this. So my recommendation would be get it on an alignment rack, figure out exactly what it is, and adjust it from there. Now, one thing you can do is if you take it and get it aligned, or get them to tell you what the caster is on an alignment rack, then you can use your angle finder on the top of that ball joint see what it's saying, even if it's not correct. So in our case, it was actually 4 degrees, it was reading 7, but I could still use that to change it. So I could just, you know, if I wanted 1 degree, I could go from 7 to 6. That should still, you know, transfer over to the actual caster reading. So once again, I couldn't find a great way to do this in the shop. Get it on an alignment rack, and that'll be the easiest way to do it. So what I did is I went through and shortened the top control arms by about a turn and a half each. That was able to get me about 1 degree of caster that I needed. So we're done with that project. We are on to the next one. We're going to be working on this Jeep. We've got a squeaking noise we need to figure out. See you guys next time.